personally think that staked ETH is a good strategy because I believe ETH is a store of value and a money. I know that's maybe a controversial topic for certain people, but I believe it is. I believe it is on par with BTC in that respect. It's just behind because it hasn't existed for, I guess, like 6 years of BTC's life. So it's behind in like liquidity profile, network effect, all that sorts of stuff. But BTC and ETH are the only things that I would consider to be something that I would hold for decades, right? And ETH to me is superior, not just because of staking, but because I just like obviously much more bullish on the Ethereum ecosystem as a whole and driving value to ETH than I am on Bitcoin. But I think either or is like you can't really go wrong in that respect from a preservation perspective.
I would remain that ETH remains dominant because, you know, there is always innovation going on in ETH. It's not like it's a dead chain. So I just assume that the amount of smart people in the entire ETH ecosystem will bring breakthrough after breakthrough. But I just think there's a big catch up in valuation terms of the Solana network versus ETH network.
ETH and BTC have matured so much at this point, especially and with the ETF stuff. That's like the final step in my mind for BTC reaching mainstream adoption in terms of price action. In terms of like using the products themselves, we're nowhere near that. Like people using on-chain products on Ethereum or layer 2s, we are absolutely nowhere near that. I would say that we're actually probably at 2013 or earlier levels of adoption there still, right? But if you're looking at price, yeah, no, I don't think so. And that's why the cycles, I think, are going to get shorter, brought forward for BTC and ETH especially. And then also it'll stabilize over time. And we're probably not going to get those violent cycles for BTC and ETH. Maybe for the smaller things because they're just smaller. But for BTC and ETH, I don't think we're going to see those violent cycles. I would ideally like to see just BTC and ETH doing exactly what the stock market does, right? Where all the not the individual stocks, like the indexes, for example, like the S&P 500, just slowly going up, and then from time to time, with the broader economy, it sells off, right, and then goes up. Because you mentioned the macro stuff, and this is one final point that I actually wanted to hit on. I still don't think that until we get probably the ETF and until it bakes for a while, that crypto cares about the macro stuff at all. It's too small, right? It's too small. It's too irrelevant to the world financial system. Yes, there's kind of like obviously a lot of turmoil here and there, but it's not as bad as all the doomers would have you believe as well. Inflation came down. It's funny because inflation peaked in June last year. That's when ETH bottomed, right? And since then, everyone's been saying, we're going to crash again. We're going to go down again. The only time we crashed near that was FTX collapsing. And FTX collapsing couldn't even get ETH to a new low. And BTC went slightly lower, right? But since then, it's been basically up, even though this entire year, everyone's been saying, imminent recession, the world's going to fall apart, everything's going to zero. But don't get me wrong, there are people suffering, right? And the middle class is being eroded. But when you look at the market and who's actually buying, like rich people keep their money in assets, right? They buy in assets. So if the middle class is eroding and you have like just poor and rich and over time, that doesn't really affect assets because the rich are buying all the assets, right? So yes, it sucks for the middle class, it sucks for the poorer people. But if you're looking at it with just an objective investor hat on, that's why the market's still going up. Because the rich people who have the money, they're still going to bid assets.
They've still got money.
Yeah, exactly. They've still got money, and they're still affected by the inflation of obviously the dollar, and then when rates go down and stuff like that as well. So they obviously want to hold hard assets. That's why people hold BTC. That's why people hold ETH. And then if they want to do kind of like riskier things, like go down the risk curve with these smaller projects, they do that as well. And that's why you see in the broader markets as well, like people do that. And also in the broader markets, like outside of crypto, the retirement accounts count for a lot, especially in the US. That's just a constant funnel of money going into stocks, like non-stop, like constant. That's not going to stop because that's the retirement plan for everyone, right? Same in Australia with the superannuation scheme and things like that. So if you look at it like that, and then you add BTC to that with the ETF, and then even if people only allocate 1% of it to BTC, all that money is like tens of trillions of dollars going into it, and then 1% of that is still a substantial sum. So that's kind of how I view it broadly. But whether it's good, bad, or other, I don't think it matters because when you're investing, you can't look at things as good or bad. You have to look at things as objectively as possible because if you start looking at things as good or bad and you start doing like moral investing, you can do it. But if your aim is to make money, that's not the best way to make money. And that's just the truth, right? Not that I kind of, I guess, condone it or are happy about it, but I think people need to come to terms with that if they want to be a good investor. Why I tend to, outside of the angel investing stuff, I'm extremely concentrated with the things that I buy. But everyone has their own strategy. I personally think that staked ETH is a good strategy because I believe ETH is a store of value and a money. I know that's maybe a controversial topic for certain people, but I believe it is. I believe it is on par with BTC in that respect. It's just behind because it hasn't existed for, I guess, like 6 years of BTC's life. So it's behind on like liquidity profile, network effect, all that sorts of stuff. But BTC and ETH are the only things that I would consider to be something that I would hold for decades, right? And ETH to me is superior, not just because of staking, but because I just like obviously much more bullish on the Ethereum ecosystem as a whole and driving value to ETH than I am on Bitcoin. But I think either or is like you can't really go wrong in that respect from a preservation perspective. But I would say that even though I'm in sort of wealth preservation, I still have sides of it where I am accumulating wealth. Like, as I said, the other things that I own probably forever over time against fiat. That's what I kind of expect. So like, for example, I mean, people use the example of gold as being that kind of example that I just think that BTC and ETH are like much better gold if you want to look at it from that perspective. So that's how I generally kind of think about things. But you know, it's kind of funny when looking at it and looking at people's reaction to me saying, oh, it's ETH, it's staked, right? Especially my super fund, that stuff like that. Like, isn't that risky? I was like, no, I actually don't consider ETH to be that risky of an asset anymore. The other stuff is obviously, but ETH and BTC, I would consider them to be much safer than most of the stock market at this point in time.
So Ethereum is broad, deep, and has no career risk in building on it. So it's, you know, it's the establishment. It's like, if you want to build in this space, that's the easiest place to go. The density of talent, the density of applications, the density of knowledge is immense. So how can you not be bullish on that, right? That's always going to attract people. It's always going to create a rich and vibrant ecosystem. Solana is kind of the new kid on the block, but you know, they've managed to solve one of the problems that ETH was struggling with, which was speed and cost. So two of those they've managed to solve without compromising security. So, okay, that's interesting. So that's why we've seen a lot of people start building on Solana, and we've seen a very, very vibrant ecosystem being built. And so ETH had to solve that with layer twos, essentially. Well, it doesn't have to happen in Solana. But there's two big system developments in Solana that really means that it has to play catch up in value terms, I think. Doesn't mean it has to be the same size as ETH or bigger than ETH. None of those. It's just, you know, the rate of change of value accrual comes quite quickly. One is the compressed NFTs I talked about before. Nobody's got their head around this yet. People are thinking, oh, I can just print a million monkey JPEGs. You know, it's not about that. It's what else can you use a smart contract for? That's really interesting. Secondly, it's FireDancer, which most people aren't aware of yet. But FireDancer is the validator built by Jump Trading that essentially rebuilds Solana in a different language from the ground up. What they've done is double the security by having these two validators on the network. And in testing, it's had 1 million TPS. So this is of an order of magnitude different. Why does 1 million TPS matter? Because Solana's pretty fast as it is. It's because it matters, and why it's being built by Jump Trading is high frequency traders use fiber optic cables, and their constraint is the speed of light. And they're like, well, if we want exchanges to go decentralized and be able to cope with the traditional financial markets, you're going to need to get to this speed. That's what this is about. And that opens up a whole bunch of use cases. So I see the vibrancy of the Solana developer network. I also think the UX of Solana overall is just nicer. It's just an easier place to hang out. And so, you know, the applications built on Solana just seem just a little bit easier. And so the comparison, Chris Berniski talks about this as well, it's like Android versus Apple. It's like Solana feels like Apple. It's a closed system, but it's very slick, very good, will create great loyalty. Ethereum is much broader, much more open in terms of other things that can be built on top of it.
So do you expect one of them to become more dominant?
It's too early to tell. I mean, I would remain that ETH remains dominant because, you know, there is always innovation going on in ETH. It's not like it's a dead chain. So I just assume that the amount of smart people in the entire ETH ecosystem will bring breakthrough after breakthrough. But I just think there's a big catch up in valuation terms of the Solana network versus ETH network. Should it be a multi-$100 billion ecosystem? Could it be? Probably. Could ETH be a $1 trillion plus ecosystem? For sure. I'm not sure that the pecking order changes, although I'm still a bit partial to the ETH flips Bitcoin pecking order because of the number of use cases.